Let's talk about local news. It used to be, well, important. Now it seems to have faded from our daily lives. I'm talking about newspapers, of course, newspapers, but also radio and TV and even websites. We've got to reverse this fade. Local news is far too vital to become extinct. Let's look at this topic through the eyes of the movie Anchorman. Everyone remembers, most people remember, the legendary anchorman Ron Burgundy, who famously said, and I quote, "I'm kind of a big deal." Well, Ron Burgundy and his industry, local news, used to be kind of a big deal. How times have changed. Today, we're inundated by digital noise from social media and from cable news echo chambers. It's a clickbait world, right? Local news has become undervalued and underappreciated. It shouldn't be. Local news can be the narrative of a neighborhood. It can be the heartbeat. Unfortunately, since 2005, the United States has lost more than 30% of its newspapers. We're losing 2 newspapers every week. When things like that happen, it can create news deserts. A news desert is an area where there is absolutely no reporting of local happenings. Another situation is that conglomerates are buying up newspapers and then gutting them. Experienced editors and experienced journalists are offered buyouts or they're fired. When this happens, institutional knowledge of a community goes out the door. You know, I've worked in print media for decades. I worked at newspapers on the East Coast and magazines in New York City. Now I'm based in San Diego, and most of my work goes online. I'm a freelance journalist living the gig economy. And I also run a local news website. This website was started up a couple of years ago with grant funding. It was a national project, and a lot of editors all across the country were grouped together. We collaborated with each other. We talked about our ups and downs. And I'll never forget the one day when one of our group scored a scoop. A tiny website in a town in Texas had written an investigative story about a local politician. The politician was dirty. The story ran. A few days later, the politician lost his job. It showed us all that websites still could be watchdogs. Not too long ago, I wrote a feature story for my website about a group that calls themselves the East Village Doers. East Village is a neighborhood in downtown San Diego, pretty much the epicenter of our homeless crisis. Well, I remember the East Village Doers founders telling me how they'd met each other. They were out in their neighborhood just cleaning up, picking up a lot of dog doo. And no, the name East Village Doers does not have anything to do with dog doo. But what do the East Village Doers do? A lot. They get groups together and clean up their local park. They advocate patronizing local businesses. And they created this fund that lets people pay for burritos, breakfast burritos, for local law enforcement and for first responders. The East Village Doer story shows that a community can come together with shared image and shared concerns. Earlier this year in San Diego, we had flash flooding. It was bad, really bad. Residents had homes washed out, cars flooded, precious mementos washed down the street. It turns out that those residents had been complaining about clogged storm drains for years. Nobody heard their story. After the flooding, politicians pointed their fingers at each other. There were stories about neighbors helping neighbors, and that's great. But I'm sorry, a community that gets flooded out and could have been prevented is exactly the kind of story that local news coverage can affect. Sorry, I get emotional about that. Recently, a national newspaper wrote a story called The Rebirth of Local Journalism. The author of that story cited a study that said that in news deserts, voter turnout goes down and political corruption goes up. What does that tell us? I think it tells us that local reporting is pretty important, that local news outlets should be supported, and so should the storytellers, and that the strength of our communities lies in local connections. Finally, I think that if Ron Burgundy were here today and had a say in any of this, he would probably say, "You stay classy, local news, but primarily, just stay." Thanks for stopping by. Thank you.